church house with church family. I was reminded this evening when I had to step into, in the South we call it the Walmarts, and I am reminded of the panic and the fear and the all-out craziness that seems to be sweeping over our world. And I know I look suspicious. Try not to, but I'm sure I do. As I'm walking through the store and I see these people guarding their children from air. And I'm just smiling. I'm making it a point to smile at everybody because I'm not wearing a mask and they can see my smile. So I'm going to take advantage of that. And it's met with so many different reactions. Some of them, you can see it goes past the facade or the fear or the panic or whatever it is, and they'll smile back. And then there are some that are genuinely insulted that you smiled at them. Almost like they're confused on why you're not losing your mind. We are called to be different. I'm not called to panic. I'm not called to be dictated by fear, and neither are you. We're called to wisdom, absolutely,
That's right.
but not fear.
Yeah.
So to be able to come into the church and breathe and just let all of the craziness outside the walls just kind of drift away for a second. It's almost like going home, taking your shoes off. You know, you're safe and you're in comfort. And that's kind of what I think about when I was little and I would get cold and just like really, you got the chills deep in your bones. BB would take a big old fluffy comforter that weighed about 300 pounds and she'd put it in the dryer and she'd get it out. I mean, it would be like smoking. It was awesome. And she'd wrap that heavy comforter around me and it was just like, you could just melt into it. It was so comfortable. And I remember when I was a little kid, I thought, I wonder if this is what it means when it says that Jesus will be called our comforter. Sure, that's simplistic for a child, but is it? Because sometimes you just need to crawl up into his embrace and let him comfort you when the rest of the world's going crazy.
Yeah.
That was free. Has nothing to do with Bible study tonight. But we can take up an offering if you want. Does that make y'all feel better? Everybody alive. Y'all don't make me do Father Abraham. Come on. You awake? All right. Last week in Deuteronomy, we covered some very basic instructions and reminders that Moses gave to the new generation that was going to go into the promised land. He is the last person from that generation that's still alive. The generation that didn't believe, that had doubts about the promised land. And God's already told him, you're about to die too. So, get it all off your chest. So Deuteronomy is a retelling of the law. It's kind of like that cramming for the big test. He's going over everything, chapter reviews. He's adding some new stuff, and we'll cover a little bit of that, but I'm not going to say it's a word-for-word recapping what he's already said, but the principles are there. See, when he taught some of these lessons or gave the laws the first time, it was to a certain generation. And I don't know what your experience is, but in my house, children very rarely listen to the things that they're supposed to. Now, they know the juicy details of the stuff they weren't supposed to hear, but the stuff that was really important that they needed to hear, they didn't.
Yeah.
So this is him going back and telling the instructions and the principles and the laws that he told to the first generation, just to make sure that they got it and that they were paying attention. Some of this generation was most likely born in the wilderness. Now we're talking about 40 years. So they may not have ever been in slavery. They didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
They heard the stories, but they didn't really experience it firsthand. It's hard to celebrate freedom when you've never experienced slavery.
Amen.
Yeah.
One of the things that he told them was learn from your parents' mistakes. Honor your parents and the good things they did, their wise decisions, and the stuff that wasn't so wise, don't repeat those. It doesn't honor your parents if you repeat their bad mistakes. Have faith in God, trust Him, and not what you see. Our eyes are deceptive. What we see is not always really what is there. But the most important commandment was actually a reminder. Pastor, you can turn the air up just a little bit. We got people shivering in their skins. If you need to, it's on 72. If you want to just turn it up a little bit, we got people doing this on the pews. I can't do it and teach, or I would. One of the most important commandments that He gave was actually a reminder about the Shema. Anybody want to tell me what the Shema is? One Lord. Hear, O Israel. Deuteronomy 6:4. This is the principle. This is the covenant. This is the basis that everything the Jewish people were, all wrapped up in this one commandment. This was their foundation. Verse 5 says, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might." Everything they were as a people in covenant with God revolved around this particular verse. Now, this is important to note. Okay, now remember, this is a new generation. Okay, this was not an issue that the Israelites were battling right then at that moment. He didn't preach this. He didn't tell them about the Shema. He didn't tell them about this covenant because they were struggling with idolatry. Does that make sense? It wasn't a correction. It was a reminder. This issue was in their past. Their parents had messed up. Remember the golden calf. Remember, the snake. There's several issues that they have had. But at this particular point, He's not addressing something saying, listen, y'all are messing up. You got to fix this. He's telling them something to remind them of a slip up in their past and something that they would deal with in the future. Sometimes God will actually place something in our heart by way of something that we read or a sermon that we hear. And we might possibly think, that doesn't apply to me. It doesn't really have anything to do with me. Now, you guys have probably never had that happen. But I have sat on a pew and thought, okay, that's good. Lord, why did I have to be here today? This is not groundbreaking revelation. Well, let me speak to that for a second. One reason that we're here even when the sermon is not hitting us directly in the soul at that very moment is to help usher other people into the presence of God.
That's right.
The other part is to be in unity and like mind and spirit. That's another reason. Another reason is because if you get something in your soul before there is a controversy, then you can pull it from your heart when you need it. Mm-hmm. Preemptive lessons don't spark the same type of response as it would in the battle. Yeah. For instance, Johnny, don't run in the house, you can bump your head. Okay, Mom. Or Johnny's running through the house and boom, he hits his head. Be careful, don't run. You see the difference? One, Johnny's got a bump on his head. And then Mom is like, oh, don't run in the house. The other one is as he starts to run, he remembers Mom saying, Mom said I shouldn't run in the house. I think I'm going to do that. And it saves him the bump. Does this make sense? Sometimes a preemptive lesson doesn't get the same type of response. It has time to soak in, kind of like dishes in the sink. It can stick there in your brain and you can apply it sometimes to other people's life. You see a mistake somebody else is making, you're like, oh, that's why Pastor says, that's why we don't do that. Yeah? Okay. So, it can be clouded sometimes if you're in the middle of the situation. If Moses waited until they were worshiping idols and then said, God said don't worship idols, as they're sacrificing things to idols. In the middle of all the hype and the holler, and they've got a mosh pit going over here and people are banging on drums, the response is going to be defensive. Yep. Well, why not? Can you give me chapter and verse for that? Why doesn't God want me to be happy? because they're in the middle of the controversy. But this is beforehand. One person said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That fits. So every lesson allows time for the lesson, allows time for the lesson to soak. Very quickly, I'm going to throw this in because I've seen this in my life. The role of a pastor is not necessarily just to correct destructive behavior, but it's also to prepare people so destructive behavior doesn't happen.
Right.
Or to warn them or to protect them. Right?
Yes.
Never be so bold as to say this message isn't for me. Because it may be, just not yet. Maybe. Moving on. Moses continues his speech to this new generation with some laws, principles for their future. And these were in addition to what he had already given them. Anybody remember how many Jewish laws there were?
365.
Very close.
For each day.
Little less distant. 613. It's almost the right numbers. It was just kind of jumbled. 613 total laws. Now, these were civil laws. They were religious laws, ceremonial laws, all the laws, everything. Everything from diet to whatever. So he had given all of these, including the ones in Deuteronomy. It comes out to 613. So some of the ones were already there. Some he adds. He says, don't align yourself with other nations. They worship idols. You're better than that. You were called to be holy. Act like it. Okay? Chapter 9, he reminds them that they're not as righteous as they think they are. I think that's pretty funny. He's like, don't get a big head. Y'all messed up a few times. Let me remind you of those when you start getting arrogant about it. So that's in chapter 9. He reminds them of the commandments. How that happened. How he came down and the parents were dancing around a cow. And, he got a little bit big mad. Threw the tablets down, broke them, had to go do that again. He tells them all about that story. And I'm quickly going through this, y'all, but bear with me for a second. He reminds them of the priesthood and the Levites and their responsibilities. Remember we talked about Leviticus? Yeah? Leviticus? Okay. He reminds them of the blessings of obedience and the curse of disobedience. This is contrary to everything that modern Christianity stands for. Because the idea is, how can a loving God let something bad happen? But the truth is, the Bible is full of if statements. If you obey, blessings happen. If you disobey, bad stuff happens.
Right.
You don't discipline children because you hate them. You discipline children because you love them and you want them to be contributing members to society and not little jerks, right? So that's kind of the same concept. Good things happen. And this is direct correlation with God showing you something. That doesn't mean that God is causing bad stuff to happen, but yes, he may allow it. Okay. He tells them how to treat the idols in the new land. You may want to guess what that means. What should they do with the idols in the new land that they're about to go into? Destroy them. Get rid of them. Yep. Get rid of them. Doesn't say keep them as a trophy. Doesn't say sell them on eBay. Get rid of them. It's a little bit interesting. This is just an addition piece of history. In order to destroy a god in ancient times, you would knock the head off of the god. Okay? You could leave the body figure of it. You didn't ground it up into dust, but you would behead it, basically. And so when the archaeologists went back into the area of Babylon and such, they would find all of these little bodies that were separated from the heads of these little idols. Which is kind of interesting because later on in the Bible, you will see that the Philistines kidnap the Ark of the Covenant and they take it into their camp. In the morning when they wake up, they find that their giant idol, Dagon, has fallen and the head is missing. It's not missing, it's detached. Isn't that interesting? I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, that was extra. He tells what to do with those who entice others to follow idolatry. He speaks of the holy things and how to reverence the house of God. He talks about proper diet. He's telling them what to eat and what not to eat. And you thought your pastor was strict. Can y'all imagine calling pastor on Sunday morning or Sunday night and saying, okay, pastor, I need the menu. Go ahead. So it was more of a general thing. Just to throw this out there, it is restricted in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Don't eat bats. Just saying. Don't eat bats. Thousands of years ago. Anyway, he speaks about how to treat your body. Now, this is very interesting because the people don't really know what they're facing in Canaan land. They haven't lived there. They don't know about the cultures. But Moses tells them, your body is sacred. You are a holy people. Don't go carving on it. Don't pierce yourself.
Right.
Don't cut yourself. Don't do rituals for the dead. And I'm sure they're probably sitting there thinking, this message has nothing to do with me. I just don't know where he got this one from. Sermons.com, I guess. I don't know. This is so irrelevant. They're about to go into a nation that is filled with crazy idolatry practices. And as ludicrous as it may sound, there will even be a point where they sacrifice their own children.
No.
Judah, the tribe of Judah, which means praise, would sacrifice their own children in the valley of Hinnom, which becomes Gehenna, which becomes the illustration for hell. I'm sure they probably sat there and thought, this has nothing to do with me. But Moses was planting a seed because one day they were going to meet those temptations. He's planting a seed. He speaks about tithing, which was not a new concept. He speaks about caring for the poor, borrowing, lending, releasing the debts. He reminds them of the feast that we've covered and how to observe them. So we're quickly scanning over these, but we're actually going to come back to them as they become applicable to our stories. Because if I went through every one of these laws and I just broke them all down for you, by the time we got to the narrative, you guys would probably have a brain of mush. So we're going to hit them as we hit their process in the story, if that makes sense. Everybody okay with that? I mean, unless y'all want to talk about incense, I can break it down. We can spend 3 months on Deuteronomy chapter 14. Y'all ready? No? Okay. All right. So Moses also talks to them about a government that's going to be set up in this new land. Yeah, let's look at that. Nicolay, chapter 16, verse 18. I didn't give her the verses. That way she could stay on her feet. And I forgot. Chapter 16, verses 18. So we're moving through it kind of quickly. We're going to slow down on a couple of places, but I'm giving you a general overview on some of this. Judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, throughout thy tribes, and thou shalt judge the people with just judgment. Thou shalt not wrest judgment, thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift, for a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise, and pervert the words of the righteous. That which is altogether just shalt thou follow, that thou mayest live and inherit the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Now, there's been a lot of talk about our Constitution and how our country was founded and the principles that we stand for and our freedom and all that kind of stuff over the last few weeks. And if you'll notice, God is telling the people through Moses that these are the common sense principles that you should follow. And if you do, then you shall live and inherit the land, and everything's going to be okay in the land. But if the judgment is not just, and your officers start taking bribes, and they have stocks in medical companies, and then they're trying to, if all of those things happen, if they can take millions of dollars on their campaign trail, that perverts the way that they present truth and justice.
Yep.
Sounds like common sense. Common sense is not as common as it used to be, but basically it's don't accept a bribe. Be honest and be just. Period.
Yeah.
Period. So let's look at an example of the justice system that's carried out under, or the justice, I'm sorry, that's carried out under this legal system. Chapter 17 and verse 2, this is just one of the examples that Moses gives. He says, if there be found among you within any of the gates which the Lord thy God giveth thee, man or woman that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of the Lord thy God in transgressing his covenant, and hath gone and served other gods and worshipped them, either the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee that thou hast heard of it, and inquired diligently, and behold, it be true, that the certain thing, and the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought in Israel, that thou shalt bring forth the man or that woman who have committed that wicked thing unto the gates, even that man or that woman, and shalt stone them with stones till they die. So basically, if someone comes and reports that a person is going against the covenant they have with God, what was the primary covenant that the Jewish people had?
One Lord.
There's one Lord. So if they're worshiping something else, they are going against that covenant. Okay? They're also about to go into a city that is based around the Canaanite fertility gods. Okay, so sensuality is a god in its whatever form in this land that they're going into. So this would even cover immoral sins like fornication or adultery or anything along those lines. So somebody has reported them to the justice, to the priest, or to the officers, and they do some investigating. They ask around. They look at evidence. It's not just, oh yeah, they're guilty. Okay, yeah, let's kill them. It's diligently seeking out the truth.
Yeah.
After they have done this, after the sin is reported and they have diligently inquired about the offense, then this is added. Verse 6 of chapter 17. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. That's very interesting to me. How many times have we taken the word of 1 witness?
Yeah.
Well, so-and-so said it. It must be true. That's gossip. And then this is added. At the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, and then, but at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. Look at this responsibility of the accuser. Verse 7. The hands of the witnesses shall be the first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. So let me just write that down for you. If a person is accused of something, there has to be at least 2 witnesses before a death penalty can even be considered. But it's not just let's take them out and shoot them because they didn't have guns. But it is let's take them out, and the accusers, at least 2 of them, would pick up the stones to start with. They would have the first throw. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay, hang on. For just a minute, let's jump to the New Testament. We're looking at John chapter 8, verse 3. John chapter 8, verse 3. Now remember, it is the responsibility of the accuser, the witness, the 2 witnesses at least, to begin the death penalty. John chapter 8, verse 3. And the scribes and the Pharisees brought unto him being Jesus, a woman taken in adultery. And when they set her in the midst, they say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they say, tempting him, that they may have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground, as though he had heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground, and they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus had lifted up himself, he saw none but the woman, and said unto her, Woman, where are thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? And she said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Now, that in itself is an absolute beautiful story. Y'all, I'm about to choke on my tongue. You're going to have to just know my heart and believe me here for a second. Anybody ever heard that story before? Does it make sense now that you know the law in Deuteronomy on someone who's accused and how that sentence is to be played out? Why do you think they grabbed this woman?
They didn't think she'd have any witnesses.
On her behalf? Because it sounds like she had a whole group of accusers.
Well, yeah, on her side. Yeah.
Right, but nobody to defend her. Probably because she couldn't be defended. It sounds like maybe she had experience, some customers there in the group,
And they didn't want to find out.
and they'd rather kill the witness than be exposed. So when I'm reading this, there were a couple things that stuck out to me that did not stick out before. I know most of us have heard the story a million times. By law, the ones who drug her into the middle of the street there, or into the middle of the tabernacle synagogue, wherever they were, by law, they had the right, because there were more than two of them, to pick up a stone. There was enough evidence. Let's just use a little bit of imagination. She was caught in the very act of adultery. She was probably not wearing her Sunday best there in the street. She was probably wrapped in bed sheets. Okay? Are y'all with me there? So there's not really a whole lot of questioning going on about her guilt.
Yeah.
So here they are, and it kind of gives this picture, this word picture, indicating that they're standing there with their stones. Like, okay, Jesus, Moses said we should stone her. What do you say? By stooping down and writing in the sand, I have no clue what he wrote. No clue. But when you're in the midst of an angry mob and they're fired up, the last thing in the world you want to do is stoop down and make yourself vulnerable. Think about that. They're big mad. Okay, they're trying to find a way to kill him. They're trying to find a way to attack him. And he lowers himself into the sand where he could easily be overtaken. And he shows humility and kind of like, I ain't afraid of you at the same time. It's kind of like turning your back on an angry dog. You just don't do that, right? So that was the first thing that I noticed. I also noticed that whenever all of the people left, he never looked at the woman and said, you're innocent. Because she wasn't. What he did say was, no man condemns thee. She was made free from the consequences of her sin. And she was released from the shame of her sin. Let me show you why. when the men dropped the stones and walked away, they gave up their case.
Right.
They conceded. Case dismissed. Meaning they couldn't come back and charge her again unless she fell into sin again. But by them dropping the stones, she won
Right.
that case. Not because she was innocent, but because she was covered. Because grace and mercy stepped in on her behalf.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
Praise
This is taking an Old Testament law, where in the New Testament it said we're not held by that law. We're not prisoners of the law anymore. We're under grace and mercy. That doesn't mean that we can go and abolish the law and live immorally. It means grace and mercy cover us now.
Yeah.
And death is no longer the sentence.
Hallelujah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So by dropping the stones, they can see. And he said, go and sin no more. That's what grace and mercy does. We were guilty. There's no question about that. When God forgave my sins, I didn't become innocent. I became free of the consequence.
Thank you, Jesus.
Does that? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
The case against us was dismissed. By his grace, we have the power to go and sin no more. That's not something we can do on our own. We probably wouldn't have gotten into the mess the first time if we could have done it on our own, right? Yeah? But God's grace gives us the ability to live that holy life.
Yeah.
So this is what really got me. And I didn't notice this until today. And I know this is short, but, I'll make up for it later. There are a lot of times when we are our own accusers. We don't really need anybody to drag us by the hair and throw us at Jesus' feet because, we're doing that ourselves. I've watched people kind of carry them on themselves into the church, and they're just like, oh, here I am, the wretched person that I am. Let me throw myself at the altar. Over and over and over again. We know that God has forgiven us, but we still feel that need to punish ourselves and to keep ourselves from enjoying life. We don't deserve joy because we are our own accusers. It happens a lot. I'm not saying that you guys do that. Maybe somebody needs to hear that that's going to hear it on the recording. I don't know. Maybe we don't feel worthy or capable of living a holy life because we still feel the accusation and the shame. And that's because the accuser looks us in the mirror every morning.
Yep.
Yeah.
When you're brushing the teeth of the accuser, it's hard to get rid of them. Right?
Yeah.
I'm sure that lady felt a huge sigh of relief, or gave a huge sigh of relief when she looked up and noticed that all the men had left the scene. But technically, there were still 2 people there. How many witnesses does it take to sentence to death? There were still 2 people there. Jesus Christ and she herself were still there. Her fate was technically still held in the balance as far as she was concerned. I'm sure she felt conviction and knew that the accusations were warranted. I knew she did. I mean, I can only imagine you're laying there at the feet of Jesus. You've been thrown in the sand.
Yeah.
You're a hot mess. You've got sweat everywhere. You're wrapped up in sheets. All of these men have spoken out against you, talking about what a shameless piece of trash you are, and you can't deny it.
Yeah.
What if he asked her, are you guilty? Even though all the accusers had left, if he looked at her and said, did you do it?
She would have to be stoned.
She couldn't lie. If she said, yes, I am guilty. Yes, I am. I've done all these things. He's witnessed it.
Right.
She's admitted it. She's condemned.
Word of the law.
So when he looked at her and said, where are your accusers? Hath no man condemned thee?
Right.
I have to believe there was a little bit of a play on words there.
Yeah.
I think he was giving her a chance. He was saying, I've used wisdom and I've eliminated all of the men accusers. But what about the woman I'm looking at? She said, no man condemns me. She said, no man, Lord, no man. She had to decide if she was willing to condemn herself. I'm going to be very honest with you. I struggle. Every day when I wake up, before I do anything, I'm still laying there with my face all smushed in the pillow, hair is a hot mess. I have to make the decision for that day if I'm going to let myself condemn me. That's just brutally honest. That's the way it is. Because my mind wants to condemn me. I don't think that there's any less power in God's redemptive grace and mercy. But my mind is strong. Every day I have to sacrifice that and give it to God. And there are days when I jump up in a mad rush and I don't even think about anything. I'm already late and I forgot about something. Alarm didn't go off. I don't know. The bulldog made me sleep in something. And I rush and I start getting dressed. Halfway through the day, something will happen. And instantly I start remembering all regrets. Things I should have said. Things I said that I shouldn't have said. Things I should have said. I didn't say. All things. All the things. Or somebody will say something and it'll remind me of a horrible time. And I'm like, ugh. See, you are worthless. I don't know why I have to surrender that daily unless it's just to keep it fresh in my mind so I can help other people who do as well. It's not really a battle, it's just a constant reminder. But at this time, this woman had to make a choice. Are you going to condemn yourself? Or are you going to accept freedom? When she said that no man condemns her, Jesus responded and said, neither do I condemn you. That means that even if she decided to condemn herself, it didn't matter because his grace and mercy covered.
Yeah.
She would have stood alone.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you.
Go and sin no more. You see, when she walked away from that, she made the decision to fall back into the old trap again or to sin no more. It is commonly believed that she actually was restored. And she came later, right before the crucifixion, and she came in with tears in an alabaster box. There's no proof that it's the same woman, but it's commonly thought. Because she had so much to thank God for. So by Jesus releasing her of the consequence of her sin, he took the power of self-condemnation out of her hands. That's mercy. That's mercy. Deuteronomy 17:6 says, at the mouth of two witnesses or three witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of one witness shall not be put to death. I've often said that one of the greatest things that God has done in my life is He saved me from myself. That's just the truth of it. Many suffer from the shame and they don't even realize it. Like, people have no idea that they're dealing with shame. They just think that it's depression or oppression, or they're bipolar, or they have a chemical imbalance, or they just have severe mood swings, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying those things aren't real, but so many of those things fall into the exact same category as unresolved shame.
Yes.
They do. They manifest just alike. Just alike. Many people don't realize that it affects their walk with God, their prayer life. How in the world can you talk to this almighty Savior when you don't feel like you are even worthy to speak His name?
That's true.
And if you don't believe he's forgiven you of your sins and given you a new future, why are you going back to him? And then you feel guilty for going back to him. It's a cycle.
Yep.
It's a cycle. It affects your prayer life. It affects your relationship with others. Either you constantly want to please and fix it for other people, or you don't feel worthy of their love, or you're constantly trying to prove your worth. Shame is the grudge I hold against myself. But God came to deliver us from that.
Yes, Jesus.
From sin and shame. Sin and shame. Look at this. This was amazing. Okay, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. And I'm almost done. Y'all with me? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Anybody ever heard that verse before?
Yes.
There's one slight issue with that verse. When you read it in Greek, which I cannot, but I can translate it through the lexicon. When you read that verse, it doesn't say despising the shame. Some translations actually says, I lost my page, hold on. Some translations say, author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising its shame. The despising the shame of the cross, which sounds right. Yeah, I mean, it was shameful to be hung on a tree, right? It makes sense. It'll preach. And I'm sure that has its application. But this is the thing. In Greek, there is no thee or it before shame. It just says despising shame. He went to the cross despising shame. Shame wasn't describing something. It was in itself a thing. It's a word that stands on its own. It's not the shame or its shame. It's just shame. Why did Jesus die on the cross? What was the point?
Giving us wisdom.
Okay, what does Isaiah say when he prophesies about Jesus who's going to die on the cross?
Take the sins of our sins
Let me help you out. The verse starts with, but he was wounded
for our transgressions.
for our transgressions. He was bruised for
Our iniquity.
and the chastisement
Of our sins.
peace was upon him. Chastisement of our peace
Peace, right.
was upon him. And by his stripes we
We
were
are
healed.
Healed.
Worthy. Are you?
Jesus didn't die on the cross just for salvation. If Jesus only died on the cross for salvation, he died in vain.
That's right.
Yeah.
He died on the cross. He suffered the chastisement, the whip, the beating, the bruising, not just for our sins. That was the death. But all of those extra things that he endured was for our emotional healing and our physical healing. That's why I have a real problem when people talk about this virus being greater than God. That bothers me.
Yeah.
That bothers me. There is not a virus on this planet that is too great for the healing power of God.
Amen.
He bled for
That's
that
right.
healing.
Praise
That's right.
He was punished for our peace. Shame and peace are opposites. If you have peace, you don't have shame.
That's right.
Transgressions are for the rebellion and the sin. Iniquities are evil, fault, mischief. All of these things happened so that we could be delivered, not just from sin, but so we can live life more abundantly here on earth. I was so touched today when I was reading through this, and I got to this one particular part of the law, and I thought, you know, when Peter denied Christ 3 times, he said, "You're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster does his thing. You're going to deny me." And Peter walked right up in it, denied him 3 times before the roasted chicken, hallelujah, before the rooster did his thing. But then after Jesus rose from the grave, and he's out on the shore, he's just cooking up some fish breakfast while some of the apostles are out there fishing. And some of the apostles see this man out cooking on the shore, and they're like, look at that. What are he doing? Y'all smell fish? Smell fish sticks? And while they're trying to figure out, they're looking to see who this guy is. It says Peter starts throwing out the outer coat, ripping it off, diving into the water, because he didn't even wait for them to row the boat to shore. He jumps out and swims to the shore because he knows that's Jesus out there. And he's so heartbroken, and he's so filled with shame. You see, shame had two effects there during the crucifixion. It took Judas to a place of suicide. But it took Peter back to the feet of Jesus. So he swims to the shore, and he goes up, he just falls at Jesus' feet, and he's just, I can't believe it's you. Oh my goodness, this is so wonderful, blah, 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 blah. And they start talking. And in the course of that conversation, Jesus looks at him and says, Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my sheep. Conversation goes on. Second time, Peter, do you love me? I do, Lord. You know I do. That's the second time. Third time, do you love me? Lord, you know I love you. How many times did Peter deny Christ?
3.
How many times did God give him a chance to reconcile?
3.
He was so considerate of what Peter needed to mend his heart. When he looked at this woman laying on the ground, covered in her own shame, he gave her the opportunity to say, no man condemns me, and neither do I. I don't condemn me either. I love that that's beautiful, because every day we have a choice.
Yes.
We can be held by the law and the shame that comes with it, or we can take that opportunity and say, God doesn't condemn me, and neither do I. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, I love you. I thank you, Jesus, for what you're doing. God, I thank you for sweeping into this place. God, you are faithful.
Thank you for your love and your mercy.
God, I thank you for your comfort, Jesus, and your love, God.
Thank you for loving us.
Thank you, Jesus, for your grace and your mercy, Lord. God, I ask that you would minister to hearts tonight, Lord. God, whoever is listening or whoever may listen in the future that's dealing with the shame and the oppression and the guilt, God, I ask that you would mend their hearts and their spirit, Lord. God, give them a fresh approach, Jesus. Let your anointing flow through them, God, and let them feel your love, your restoration, Jesus. I praise you and I thank you, Jesus. Lord, I love you. In Jesus' name.
Thank you, Jesus.